Welcome once again to our NPTEL MOOC module on health economics. Without discussing the background much, I think we will straight away introduce the new week. It is quite contemporary in nature and it has huge applications. However, to understand this week correctly, we have titled this as Theory and Principles of Economic Evaluation. This has 5 lectures. To start with, we'll give you a background of the economic evaluation. So we need to take a journey of the theoretical foundations of economic evaluation. As we know already, we have discussed on health systems. There are types, features, also we understood price rationing, different health insurance schemes and their directions such as uncertainty, dealing with uncertainty as adverse selection, moral hazard and price, non-price competition, etc. So, we will be now emphasizing on the evaluation and its background. In the picture you can easily find what is the clear difference between positive and normative economics. And based on normative one, we used to refer to the norm, and principles. Whereas in the positive one, we usually refers to the issues such as descriptions of economic variables like trends. Then we will derive some testable hypothesis about the relationship between the variables, okay, and accordingly we explain and predict for the future trends. For example, while we analyze the government healthcare system, we draw a hypothesis such as government provided healthcare increases public expenditure. So that's basically a testable hypothesis, and that's through positive economics discourse. Now we need to clarify normative economics. That's part of our economic analysis, and usually it clarifies the judgments. And in this case, we usually explain making judgments about relative desirability of alternative economic outcomes, like making judgments about what could be the best option among alternative ways of delivering healthcare. So, in futurity, usually it is in futuristic context and very difficult to observe based on the real time data. However, since it is normative, we usually drag its direction to different norms. Hence, the extreme possibilities are emphasized. So, given this backdrop, what are these objective of this lecture? What are the objective of this lecture? We will explain how normative economics underpins the principles and practice of economic evaluation, and to show the role that these play in providing the theoretical foundations of economic evaluation methods. Let us introduce the evaluation. What is all about in especially economic evaluation refers to a broad range of analytical techniques that is used to describe and compare the benefits and cost of competing uses of resources, as mentioned in Morris et al. In economics, both positive and normative approaches can be used for evaluation. However, as the nature of both differs, the choice of approaches also differ with respect to the change in the area within economics. So, we for example, we can discuss about in the context of financial economics, we usually take the help of positive economic evaluation, whereas in environmental context we used to take the help of normative economics evaluation. With respect to healthcare, the economic evaluation is said to be normative in nature, as it has certain connection with the human body, which is largely derived from the nature, and it has a number of implications and linked to the surroundings, hence looked in the perspective of normative discourses. So, it is normative in two ways. What are these? One is through perspective based. This is explicitly or implicitly including one treatment is better than another after weighing of the cost benefit. Second one is value judgment based, where value judgment usually subjective assessment of what is considered valuable or desirable. It encompasses decisions about how to measure and value benefits, what constitutes a cost and how to weigh trade off between different options. Why role of prescriptions and value judgment is important evaluation, especially the normative economics evaluation which I have just discussed. In practice, health benefits enjoyed by a person involves sacrificing sources for other goods, which we discuss with the comparison of health goods and H as against other consumption goods such as X. So, trade-off between X and H is discussed largely in our Grossman chapter and demand for healthcare chapter in detail. Again, we will also revisit. This is how, if you recollect correctly, I am sure you can understand the possibility, the production possibility between H and X, tending from the minimum level of H till H. It does not start from. It is not the case with these, not with the case of this at all. This is rejected, as we already said. Usually, we explain in the context of if it is two economic goods or consumption based goods, then that is a possibility, whereas in health case it starts from H minimum, and where we emphasize about pre-launch and trade-off zone, and we mentioned that the optimization is usually discussed in the trade-off zone, comparing this and X, but after a after the pre-launch zone. Okay. So, trade-off zone, we usually discuss individual trade-off between health with consumption of other goods and especially in Grossman's model and their prediction is that while optimizing utility, people chooses combination of health and other goods, leading to less than H maximum. Okay. So, we discuss about pre-launch zone with a person is having both H and X can be increased, whereas in trade-off zone one has to compensate or compromise, and hence the optimization or utility optimization are discussed, and it is the trade-off zone that really matters in deriving the best optimal zone. You can refer to the respective Grossman model chapter which we have discussed with its theoretical foundation very clearly. Hence, Grossman model showed the trade-off between H and X, which is very inevitable, and as a result, the desirability of any given option invoke perception and value judgments about the extent to which such trade-offs are acceptable and desirable. So, therefore, the theory and practice of economic evaluation in healthcare is inescapably normative in nature. There are different approaches within normative economics. We will discuss this. One is called welfare economics based, that is called welfarism, and another is called non-welfarism. And we will emphasize one by one in terms of welfare risk concept. The term welfarist was actually coined by Professor Amartya Sen in the year 1977. And this has a systematic analysis of social desirability of any set of arrangement, say maybe allocation of resources solely in terms of individual utilities for evaluating economic policies. Whereas in case of non-welfarism context or non-welfarist positions may include perspective that emphasize concepts like justice, rights and other values beyond individual welfare. Welfare economics, we again based on the principles of normative traditions in economics. The objective is to devise set of rules to achieve those logical and consistent ranking of all alternative social states. So, for example, how scarce healthcare resources are better allocated, between which we might have to choose. The answer in this case is many different ways to achieve this allocation, maybe through delegate decision making to politicians and rely of their judgments on what is the best of societal need, or an autocrat. Okay, and democratic format might be actually again making it further confused. Hence, in these two directions, there is a possibility of a clear choice. However, assessing desirability is different in welfareism context. There are three major characteristics of welfareism, starting with individualism in welfare economics. This views an individual affected by choice function, and that is largely relevant related to information, and information made the best social choices. And the individual is the best judge of him or herself, behaving the way that will be maximizing his or her utility. Hence, in welfare economics, we discuss social welfare context, that is a social, societal measure of well-being, exclusively identifying the product of utilities of the individual members and cumulatively optimizing the social welfare. The mathematical operations or the representation of these individualism perspective of social welfareism or the welfareism direction is basically a function of all individual utilities. So, it is mentioned as SW, that is social welfare. This is utility, and X utility of A, B until N. Then A, B, N are actually different individuals, and X is the state of the world. Okay. Given the state of the world, we can discuss about social welfare, and this is also called Bernoulli Nash social welfare function. So, second one is called consequentialism in welfare economics. So, welfare economics centers on the consequences of people's choices, especially their consumption patterns, and utility associated with their consumption of goods and services is either neutral or independent of their allocation process, whether it is market, political, or other process. So, in every cases we will find utility attached to it. Again, the generation of utility not only from consumption, our own consumption, and whether there is caring externalities like the consumption of others of whom we care are also part of the consequentialism concept of welfare economics. Third one is the challenge of aggregations, which is very difficult. The primary challenge in welfare economics propose a defensible basis for aggregating and combining people's preferences. One of the goals of this is to establish a decision rule for aggregating the choice function of people, which involves addressing trade-offs measured in terms of their utility. Hence, situation arise where the desirability depends on the trade-off between people's utilities. No objective way so far exists to resolve such trade-offs to aggregate their welfare. So, it is largely subjective and value judgment based. Value judgments methods are usually used to understand. Here we are discussing the Pareto principles of welfare economics, which is considered to be one of the best judgment method. This is also called basic judgment as per our theoretical understanding over a period of time, and this is also a base judgment as well, and this serves as a foundational normative framework for evaluating states of the world and social choices. The value judgment is indeed the heart of welfare economics, proposed by Pareto in 1906. You can read the paper of Bosino 1987 for this. This defines Pareto principle assesses whether a state or an action is preferable if it makes at least one person better off without making another worse off. That is called Pareto, even optimality or Pareto principle. So, the unique combination the society has achieved, if any dismantling attempts are taken, that is going to compensate, or one is making, one of them would be at the level of or content of loss. Welfare economics use the Pareto principle to determine if a change or policy benefits society without harming anyone, making it a key tool for policy analysis. So, Pareto's role in theoretical foundation, Pareto plays a critical role in establishing theoretical foundation of economic evaluation. So, Pareto concepts are usually discussed in two aspects. This provides basis for judgment or judging a given situation to be optimal or not, or for ranking states relative to each other based on utility obtained by each person in each state. So, now this theoretical foundation, that is Pareto analysis, is actually deep rooted with consumer choice theory, and this requires each person choose their bundles and consistently rank those bundle of goods that will indicate stability and even transitivity preferences. How Pareto principle works? The goal of Paretian analysis, indeed of welfare economics in general, is to aggregate these preferences to produce social welfare ordering. So, here if you go back to your microeconomics chapters, we at the end advanced microeconomics chapters, we used to have a general equilibrium model, where again referring to the same Edgeworth box diagram to explain Pareto principles. So, it is adapted from Murray's 2012, and we will be clarifying each of them systematically. Here it shows commodity X and Y, goods X and Y, and in extreme two corners we have the two people and their choice functions. And if you remember, we used to attach their indifference map. This is for one consumer, and reverse another consumer indifference curves are mentioned. And once again, if you see this, you will find the clear difference. Now, this is the indifference curve of the person B, and in reverse the other indifference curves are plotted. So, this is also called Edgeworth-Bowley box, mapping each individual's preference function, and the length of x axis is on explaining goods, quantity of goods, and y it is a quantity of good y. So, every point that is feasible and a unique allocation is defined. Now, we will discuss the best possible bundles where both the consumers simultaneously try to reach at their optimum level of satisfaction. So, the Pareto principle offers a means of identifying which of these points can be considered socially better than another one. Okay. Points, if we count points, any points lying near B that show higher utility for person A and vice versa. Pareto principles indeed means identifying those points which would derive the best satisfaction and without compromise the another one. Okay. So, like In this diagram, we have started highlighting the best possible indifference curve each of the person A and B can attain, and that is highlighted over here. Let there are two people which we said, and two goods are fixed with X and Y commodities. There will be pure exchange economy based explanation mentioned in this diagram to highlight the Pareto optimality function. If you look at point A, that is the allocation, the person A can change what good he has by choosing to exchange his goods with B, and in point A you can it is highlighted over here. I am not marking, so it is highlighted in red color. And what can we say about the overall social welfare in this situation? We count sometimes the concept called egalitarian approach, that's simply allocating equally by dividing the share by half each of both the commodities X and Y. However, in welfare concept or economics approach, by contrast focuses on utility of each person who enjoy from the consumption of X and Y. If one person has strong preference of good A, then B with equal allocation clearly will not maximize individual or joint welfare. Whereas um, in welfare economics concept, you see the point A and B which we have highlighted over here are actually indifferent to both the persons, and both persons can easily exchange their basket of commodities because these lie on the same indifference curve. What we can say about the overall social welfare in this context, that is explained, and now we are explaining three cases of alternative allocations. First case is if we start at point A and shift to point B. Okay. Both person A and B, as I mentioned, are on the same indifference curve. So, both experience exactly the same level of utility at A and as they do at B, each of them well off as before. Now, point A and B are called Pareto indifferent. In terms of overall social welfare, both points are identical and will be ranked equally. In the egalitarian case, usually anything is between the two parties is considered to be divided equally. So, in the second case, we start again from point A and shift it to point E at the center, and that is usually on discussed as the the contract curve. Okay, and it's also called ridge lines, and the center one is called the contract curve, and will be emphasizing once again. So, both person A and B, there will be a shift to the indifference curve further from the origin, that is point A. So, both experience higher utility, and this new allocation that is good for both are called weak Pareto improvement. Like if we are highlighting point E, for both A is we have already discussed the highest one, and for B we have discussed is this, and accordingly we plotted 2 points and tried to see that these 2 points are actually indifferent. However, there is a possibility, third possibility, the average path, the middlemost point, that's on the contract curve. If we highlight point E, and in both the cases it is actually the new allocation is actually good for both persons, and we cannot strongly mention that one, if to attend E, we are actually compensating another one, or there will be some trade off. Since there is no trade off to reach E and both are gaining, of course, this is called Pareto improvement, but that is called weak Pareto improvement. Pareto rather discusses the best possibility if there are any changes from A to B, or from both A and point B, that must be compensating or must be trading off. That is the right word. When we are saying compensation principle, we are actually referring to other theories of Higgs and Calder. We will be discussing in a short while. Now, weak refers to unobjectionable value judgment. Okay, whereas strong, had it been a strong case, it would have been like some kind of trade off. In terms of overall social welfare, point E is Pareto superior to point A. On the third case, if you start again at point A and shift to point C, okay, a person A in the same indifference curve is at A, but for person B will be shifted to a higher level of utility. Hence, person B will try to improve, try to actually reach at that level. So, to reach at that level, one has to be be at the losing end. One person is better off, that is person B is better off, and another is worse off. Here shift to point C is called strong Pareto improvement. Now, you can just prepare for the objectives like what is the difference between weak Pareto improvement and strong Pareto improvement. So, I am just writing once again, weak versus strong Pareto, Pareto efficiency or Pareto improvements. All right. So, that should be noted and must be clarified. Strong means somewhat stronger value judgment. In terms of overall welfare, point C is also called Pareto superior to point A. So, in conclusion of this, from these cases, regardless of the starting point, Pareto improvements always possible as long as there is a different marginal rate of substitutions of x and y for different people. Where slope of each indifference curve is equal, that is marginal rate of substitution between x and y is equal to marginal rate of substitutions of x y in terms of ratio. So, mu x a or mu y a and mu in the A case and mu x b and mu y b, such points are called Pareto optimal or Pareto efficient. So, you can also prepare these Pareto optimal or efficient combinations based on this equation. In the graph as used in the earlier slides, there are multiple Pareto optimal locations connected with a broken line known as contract curve, which we already highlighted in a diagram. So, in the once Pareto optimal allocation arrived, further exchanges improve one person's utility by reducing others. Such changes are called Pareto non-comparable and even not possible to rank its states which one person is better off than others. So, one food for thought is here, if the richest people were able to increase their utility while the poor continued to have the same level of utility as before, is this change good or is it Pareto improvement? So, the clear answer is of course yes, it is Pareto improvement, although it is against both egalitarian and Rawlsian perspective on equity. If you remember, Rawlsian principle is largely discussed in the context of justice. You can refer to the book called Theory of Justice, and the distributional justice is highly emphasized in Rawlsian perspectives. So, we are now discussing, we will be emphasizing some of these aspects or already emphasized in the equity chapter, equity and health chapter in unit number 4. So, Pareto principle for value judgment based economic evaluation has limitations along with few advantages. So, a clear question that can be attempted, a government policy that reduces poverty and involved a very small sacrifice by the rich, it will not be a Pareto improvement. So, you may cross check and answer this, it will be interesting. So, what are the advantages of Paretian approaches? It basically it requires minimal information. It is requiring that only people can rank the options, that is bundles of goods presented to them. These advantages however comes at the expense of its being useless as a criteria for social choice in many, if not all, in real world situations. The limitations of Paretian approach is that in some cases, um, Pareto optimal points are widely uneven and no complete ranking age is possible. Once we have reached said that contract line, it's very difficult to actually rank. So we cannot cope the mixed outcome, that is A win or B loses, cannot even rank all optimal points against each other, that is from point A and F, and cannot even rank all non-optimal points against optimal, that is F and C. Even cannot rank optimal points against each other from point D to C. This does not allow to compare to any pair involving trade-off, that is between A to G. Okay. So these all points are even explained further through different approaches. I think all those A, B, C, D, G, etc. You please follow it up, and if you have any doubts, do raise your queries. There are alternative ways since to avoid or to deal with the limitations by Calder and Hicksian criteria. It is largely based on compensation principle. Clearly, if welfare economics is followed, a practical guide to resource allocation in healthcare, then it actually needs to go beyond the Pareto principle. I mean, basically, to find out the best possible bundle in terms of resource allocation, we need to go beyond Pareto principle. To address these, we have taken the help of Hicksian 1939 work and Nicholas Calder's 1939 papers. They introduced the compensation test. The criteria offers a way to systematically evaluate and improve upon the Pareto principle shortcomings. They focuses on monetary transfers between gainers and losers. This examines relative desirability of a policy change. For example, to observe any policy intervention, suppose economists aim to evaluate relative desirability of new state because of a policy intervention compared to a status quo. The intervention in this case is one health authority is actually allocated with higher amount, that is an additional 3 million rupees by the government, whereas the other is compensated with a loss called it is cut off from that allocation. Hence, there is a loss of 2 million rupees. So, the best possible way Hicks suggested is that the extent to which the losers would be willing to pay gainers to avoid the policy. So, like since the authority, that is the gainer, is allocated with 3 million rupees, the gainer might be in a position to actually go by the policies of the government, the from the government where allocation is made. A loser might be monopolizing enough and then may give a bribe which is to the extent of if it is 2 million. Okay. Still that is not compensating enough to avoid the principles of the government. If it is 2 million but 3 million is allocated, policy is desirable if losers willing to pay is less than gainers potential gain. So in that case, when 2 million, if it is actually given by the losers, in that case the policy is still desirable. That is why the authority is allocated with an amount. Hence, an amount that to be compensated should be equivalent. Then only there will be justice between two parties to have a best bundle. But till 3 million, I think the policy is considered to be desirable. Whereas in Calder compensation test, it is similar to that of Hicks. They emphasizes full compensation for the losers. Suppose again in the context of desirability of an outcome of policy interventions, In this case, once again, if the authority is allocated with the same 3 million rupees by the government and the other loses 2 million rupees, Calder suggests that if the gainer can fully compensate the losers of 2 million, 3 million is received and 2 million if it is given by the gainers to the losers. So, the loser is not going to be worse off, his loss is compensated. Gainer still be better off by 3 minus 2, that is 1 million, is it 1 million rupees. Still the policy which is targeted and supported with the institutions is considered to be effective and policy is considered to be just desirable. This is by Calder. So, what are the key takeaways in this case? We said that compensation test link utility and money, bridging the gap between intangible and measurable concept. Benefits or loss is defined as the maximum or minimum money needed to keep utility constant by adding up monetary gains or losses. Compensation test evaluate policy desirability. They preserve the spirit of Pareto principles, identifying strong as A gains and B no worse off, and weak if both A and B gain, potential Pareto improvement is there. So, in this diagram, the Calderian principle or the compensation principle is revisited in in this diagram, and this illustrates compensation test using a utility possibility frontier, that is UPF. Okay. This represents a pair of individual utility labels associated with any allocation of goods within the Edgeworth box diagram. This is the same Edgeworth box diagram, however, this is considered utility of person A as against B is considered here, and as we have seen that on the contract curve, we have compared with A to G and we have compared with A to C and A to D in our diagram. We have largely discussed about this. I am just plotting the contract curve, and somewhere here we started discussing, and we discussed about E point somewhere here if you remember correctly, and we discussed A and A over C and D point. Okay. So, now I am just clarifying once again. E, as we already mentioned, E is a possibility where there is no question of trade off and both will gain, say, improvement, Pareto improvement, but without any single person is in a position of worse off or is losing any extent. Hence, E is improvement, but it is called weak Pareto improvement. Whereas, if we are discussing about point C and point D, yes, either A will person A will be gaining or person B, there will be some trade off. Okay. So, these 2 points are called strong Pareto optimal points. So, these are all on the contract curve, and the level points discussed in the Edgeworth box and Pareto optimality example is once again highlighted, and especially points of the contract curve in Edgeworth box diagram, that is point A is in fact called non-optimal allocation of goods and lies inside the UPF, which we have already discussed. So, we have once again clarified strong Pareto optimality or improvement point and weak Pareto improvement points, and the UPF has a negative slope, and meaning that from any Pareto optimal allocation increasing one person's utility cannot occur without making the another one worse off. The compensation test, this enables ranking from any point within the UPF against any other point on the UPF, addressing non-comparability issues, especially from point, if you mark it very carefully, here we say A and G, point A within the UPF can be ranked against point G on the UPF. So, while shift from A to G may not directly improve social welfare, it allows for overall efficiency improvements. Transfers can occur between parties A and B, enabling a improvement to a point like C, which represents a more efficient allocation. There are key insights that compensation tests provide a structured way to assess and rank allocations on the UPF, considering a potential gains in efficiency and transfers between parties and contributing to a richer understanding of social welfare implications. There are limitations of the compensation test. You can follow it off. There are these important points we have highlighted, starting with potential compensation but not guaranteed. This means that this identifies potential parent improvements but do not ensure actual compensation, may lead to wealth redistribution without compensation, okay, and related to costly negotiations. Compensation may be possible, but costly to organize, identifying improvements based on cost free transfers that may not be practical. The third one is related to money as utility metric, where it is using money as a metric may not be accurately reflect well-being, and the differences in marginal utility of income can yield misleading results so far as money as utility is concerned. The conflicting desirability related limitations of the compensation test is presented here. The test can suggest both change and reversal to as desirable. This requires qualifications to address conflicting outcomes as mentioned in Shitovsky in 1941 paper in work, whereby a change is desirable if and only if it is associated with a potential Pareto improvement and a return to the original state is not an option. Last one is on incomplete ranking. And this allows ranking between some states but not all. This enables to unable to provide a complete and consistent ranking. Hence, in this lecture we discussed two types of evaluation approaches. In economics, positive and normative, we understood how healthcare evaluation is normative in nature, and also within the normative economics there are two theoretical foundation. One is called welfarist and non-welfarist. So far we have been discussing about welfarist approaches of the normative economic discussions. Within welfarist we discuss Pareto principle and Hicksian and Calderian compensation criteria. Hicks Calder compensation dealt with Pareto limitations of non-comparison of optimal allocation to non-optimal allocation, from an optimal to non-optimal allocation. Both these theories based only in ordering using individual utilities, that is indeed called weak value judgment, and did not truly reflect the actual social welfare. So, what is there in the next lecture? It is on non-welfare approach. We will discuss social welfare function through quantitative in nature to overcome the limitation of these theories based on social welfare ordering. We will be emphasizing the concept of non-welfarism, and will basically identify type of social welfare function and their challenges in constructing social welfare. So, largely the concept of non-welfarism will be discussed. These are the suggested reading. The bold one is the most highlighted one. You can refer for more clarifications. So, with this we are going to close here. Thank you for your attendance.